Hi guys, Andrew from BMG Productions Australia here. Today's video is going to cover a 350 point list for the Suicide Squad. Special mention to Rye Cunningham for the suggestions. Thank you very much and keep them coming. So, just a breakdown before we start. I've done two list variations for this. One with models exclusively from the starter box set, and then another one with the inclusion of Ric Flag, which was the model that was released just after the box set. Both have sort of the same goal of minimizing the damage of the Suicide Squad special rule, which for those who don't know is that if the Suicide Squad doesn't achieve a certain amount of victory points, depending on the points level in the game turn, you may randomly lose one of your models. So this list is sort of geared towards trying to maximize the amount of victory points that one can score and trying to minimize the risk of losing your head in the process. So let's get started with our first model. For the leader of this Suicide Squad band, I chose Ric Flag. Now, while he does have average willpower, where this guy comes into his own is through his personal traits, but I'll get to them in a second. We're going to look at his weapons first. So he has a machine gun, which has rate of fire 3 and ammo 2, which is not bad, and he has medium range, which is decent enough. So what you want to try and do with him is get to the forefront and get that 40 centimeter range down the board and try and take down the henchmen as quickly as possible. And with rate of fire 3 and 2 bloods, you're pretty much guaranteed to do that maybe 60% of the time. His other weapons are pretty good. The gun is better for short range stuff, obviously, because it's 20 centimeters, but it still is doing damage output, which is the focus of the Suicide Squad, at least in my list, to try and maximize the damage and gain victory points by taking out henchmen and sidekicks, etc., while scoring victory points. So let's have a look at his personal traits, which was why I chose him, because he does have some really good special ones. So first one we're going to look at is Bulletproof Vest. Obviously makes him harder to wound, so instead of a 2-up, it's a 4-up. The Elite Boss Special Forces rule won't come into play here, and I assume that there's going to be a Special Forces release later, I guess, or maybe next year. The multi-fire special rule is pretty good. So if you spend 2 special counters and he doesn't move, he gains +2 to the rate of fire on his weapon. So meaning his machine gun suddenly becomes a potentially 10 blood weapon, which is devastating. So that is a very good rule to have. He also has the order special rule. So by spending 1 special counter, he can allow another friendly character within 30 centimeters of him to reallocate 2 action counters. So it's like him gifting the veteran special rule to someone else. I'm not sure if it's essential, but it is useful to have. He himself has the veteran special rule, which means that he can reallocate counters. That is very useful for him, and he doesn't have to spend any points doing it. So as you can see, he's sort of geared towards damage output and having a little tactical flexibility. Our next character will be Katana. Now, the reason I chose Katana wasn't because of her amazing stats, which, to be honest, are quite average, but it was more that she is a good defensive foil for Ric Flag. She has the Bodyguard special rule, which is one of the main reasons I took her. The Bodyguard special rule means that if you spend 1 special counter, it's a passive special rule, you can protect your leader or sidekick if you're within 5 centimeters. So you spend 1 special counter, and instead of Ric Flag taking the hit, Katana will take the hit instead. Now, this is useful for several reasons. If anyone gets close enough to Ric Flag to actually be in close combat, you might have done something wrong. But that's okay, because this is why Katana's here. Her weapon, the Soul Taker Katana, should be enough of a deterrent to any potential enemies to make sure they steer well clear of her and Ric Flag. It does 2 blood, it's handy, which means it rerolls hits, and sharp, which means it rerolls the wounds. And it should make sure that any enemy thinks twice about engaging her or going near Ric Flag. Another reason I chose her was the Acrobat special rule. So Acrobat means that you can move 12, you ignore terrain obstacles, and then you can sprint 24 if you spend the right counters. I like this because she can get out in front of Ric Flag and make sure that while he's supporting her from the back, she can make sure she can take down enemies that have either been wounded enough for them to be taken out of the game, or as a deterrent sort of factor. Her martial artist special rule means she ignores being outnumbered, which is good if you're going to use her as a scouting party. Combining this with her Weapon Master special rule, which means she has +1 to hit rolls, means that she does enough damage, or she is reliable enough to make sure she's doing damage for your team, which is what you want. I mean, this is all part and parcel of the master plan. So enough about her. We're going to talk about Harley Quinn and the reasons why I chose her. So at an initial first glance, Harley Quinn sort of seems better suited to a Joker crew than she would to a Suicide Squad crew, but here's the reason why I included her in mine. Namely, it's because of her decent movement stats and her defense and a few other traits, but let's just focus on her stats for the moment. With movement 4 and the Acrobat special rule, which I've already explained, she can get across the board really quickly. I mean, what you're looking at is on average about 30 centimeters a game turn, which is comparable to a backlaw, which makes her perfect for grabbing those easy objectives such as loot, which is one of the objectives I recommend taking for the Suicide Squad, as you can place them within relatively easy range of you grabbing them early on, guaranteeing you victory points. One of her other traits makes her very valuable to the Suicide Squad as well, and this is the Confusion special rule. For 2 special counters, you can make an enemy character within 20 centimeters reduce their attack and defense characteristics by 1, and they cannot use special counters. These last to the end of the round. So effectively, if you can get her close enough, and maybe, let's say for instance, Katana's locked in combat with someone, if you use this Confusion special rule, you can try and help Katana survive a little bit more. So as we can see, it's sort of, they're trying to help one another. This list is all about trying to buff one another and give them the survivability that such a low model count crew needs. Another one of her traits, the Goad trait, is really useful as well, especially when another enemy character is already activated and they're sitting on an objective that you don't want them to score. Now, if you spend 1 special counter using Goad, you can target an enemy character within 20 centimeters, so a decent distance away for you. They have to take a willpower roll. Now, this is going to be effective at targeting henchmen, because their willpower is really bad. So if the target fails, move the character 5 centimeters. During this movement, you can't force the target to fall, which would obviously be a bit cheesy if you could, or spend any action counters. So what you want to do with this is, say if they're sitting on ammo or they're sitting next to an objective that they're holding, you use this special rule and you move them away from it, denying them the points for that round and sort of evening the odds for you. I think that's pretty handy to have. Now, Harley's weapons aren't that bad, to be honest. I mean, her Good Night Bat does 2 stuns with a reroll, and the Heavy special rule gives her +1 strength. So instead of wounding on 5s, she's wounding on 4s, which is decent, especially because it seems that female characters in Batman Miniatures game struggle to wound characters. They hit easily enough, but they can't do the wounds. I was playing Pan the other day with Copperhead, and he was hitting me fine enough, but the wounds just weren't coming because of the high roll. So 4-up makes it a little easier to wound. Her Hate Love gun, decent enough. I mean, 2 bloods, rate of fire 2, and 2 ammo with the crit of 2 additional bloods is pretty handy to have, but I wouldn't rely on it too much. I mean, you really want Harley to be running around the board using her high maneuverability to get you those objectives early, and you use the other guys in your crew to focus on taking out the henchmen, and then leaves her free to come in and help later on during the game. Now, Harley has a really unique trait called the Voices, as you can see on her card, and it's kind of a hat tip to the Trickster special rule that the Joker uses in his crew. Now, you can use these attack counters that you have, so if you put 4 on them, as wildcards, and you can spend them on any skill or action, immediately converting them to the appropriate type, which is pretty handy. So say that you've changed your plan or something's changed, you can just use them as you like, which makes her quite reliable and tactically flexible again. So this is the sort of theme of being flexible and making sure that your list can take on all comers and is not just restricted to one sort of game style play. And yeah, that's pretty much it for Harley. As you can see, she's pretty useful, and even in a Joker game, she'd probably be even more powerful than she already is in this game. But I like her for her points cost. Her funding is relatively cheap as well. So that's enough on her, and we're going to move on to Deadshot, one of my favorite models from the box set. Now, Deadshot is pretty much the go-to guy for this crew. As you can see, he has 8 willpower, which is Batman-like levels of godliness. His attack is 4, defense is 4, endurance 8, So he has all those stats that make him a real powerhouse model for this crew. You're paying for it with a 96 reputation and a funding $400, but in this list, money isn't an issue, seeing as you can't really buy a lot of equipment that's worthwhile in a tournament setting. Not saying that it's not worthwhile at all, but in this tournament setting that I'm thinking of, it's not that good. Anyways, let's go through Deadshot's weapons. So he has 3 different types of firearms, which makes him definitely someone that you want to keep at range. His 9mm twin cannons have damage of 2 blood, rate of fire 2, and ammo 2. His 40cm range and the light special rule. So those are definitely useful and handy to keep on you, but I think the next weapon is pretty good. His custom machine gun does 2 blood, rate of fire 3, ammo 1. So you're only going to get 1 shot with it, so make it count. It has a 40cm range and it has a scope, which means that if he uses it, he has the night vision special rule and he ignores ping or cover, which makes it exceptionally good at taking down that person, is entrenched behind cover or a defensive position. So it's really good for that. Next is his guns. Now they're pretty good for once you've used up everything else. That's all you've got left. Get in close and fire them as best as you can. Again, only 1 shot. So whilst he's good, he really suffers from low ammo. So you've got to make sure that you either get him to that ammo crate or you spend your ammo wisely, as once it's done, it's done. So you've got to make those shots count. Now, his special traits will help you with that. So he has the Ranged Master special rule. So that means that he receives +1 to hit on ranged attacks, which makes it useful for making those shots count. He also has the Shooter special rule. So if you're not using the scope for your weapon, he ignores the first obstacle for the ping rules, which again is pretty useful if you're firing into combat, which you may well do if you're using Katana or someone else to hold up an enemy in combat. Deadshot also comes with a Kevlar vest, which in my opinion is infinitely better than the bulletproof vest, mainly because the Kevlar vest ignores 1 damage of any type, to a minimum of 1, I should add, whenever he takes an injury, which means that if you get shot with a gun, you usually take a blood or a stun, but with the Kevlar vest on, he only takes a stun. Obviously, you take away the blood. I don't know why you'd take away a stun, but I think it's really useful in making him a survivable member of the squad. Now, his special trait, Bullet Time, uses 2 special counters, and once per game, Deadshot can attack twice during the round with different ranged weapons. Each attack must be paid for with the usual 2 attack counters, so you're probably going to load up all 4 dice into attack, 2 into special, and then maybe 1 into defense. And using the Shooter special rule, he'll ignore the first obstacle for ping. So imagine this scenario, you've got someone facing off against Titan Joker, let's say, and you have Deadshot nearby. You use Bullet Time to unload your twin cannons and your guns, your sidearms, into him using Bullet Time and using the Shooter special rule. So Joker's defense is 3, but because Deadshot's a ranged master, he'll be hitting on 2s, so you could imagine 4 bloods pretty much going through, and then you've got 4 bloods for stuns. That pretty much takes Joker out of the game, provided that those all hit, which they should do on 2-ups, and then they all wound again on 2-ups. So that could save one of your characters from being made mincemeat by Titan Joker or anybody else for that matter. So that's why I included him in the squad, because he's definitely got the skills to take down pretty much anything in the right situation. You definitely have to be able to maneuver him well to make sure that you can get this sort of activation going. But when it pays off big time. And then after that, if he's all out of ammo, run him to an objective. Run him towards an ammo crate. Just get him out of there, because in combat he's not going to do too much. He will survive and hang around, but you don't want to risk it. Especially because as a free agent, he'll be giving off 4 victory points if he's taken as a casualty. Anyways, that's Deadshot done, and then moving on to the last member of this list is going to be Captain Boomerang. So Captain Boomerang, literally one of the lamest characters DC has ever produced. At least that's the way they've marketed him in the Suicide Squad. I don't actually think he's terribly lame, but it's just the way he's depicted. Anyway, that's enough of my personal opinion. Let's get onto it. Average willpower again, average movement, average. However, he is definitely another ranged option that you want in the squad. He has the elusive special rule, which means that if he spends one movement counter, he gets +1 to defense against ranged attacks until the end of the round. He also has the Master Marksman special rule, which means that he can reroll all ranged attacks. So, while I was saying his average before, he's actually not that bad. Getting rerolls to hit with ranged weapon is pretty good. He has the Ricochet special rule. So, if he spends one special counter, after he hits with a ranged weapon, he may make an additional ranged attack with the same weapon on an enemy model that's within 5 centimeters, and he still has line of sight too. So, get a 2-for-1 special deal with that by spending one special counter. That's not bad either. He has the primary target loot. Now, I was talking before about what objectives you should take. Now, I think for this list, you should take 2 loot and 1 ammo crate. The reason why that is that loot is reasonably easy to get to in the missions, and ammo gives you the opportunity for people like Deadshot or Ric Flag to restock if they manage to get there in time. Now, with the primary target loot special rule, if Captain Boomerang is in control of loot, he picks up the loot, he gains 1 victory point at the start of the victory and recovery stage, which is very useful in making sure that the Suicide Squad achieves its victory point conditions for the round. So let's take a look at what weapons Captain Boomerang has. He has 3 types of boomerang. He has a bladed boomerang, a LE boomerang, and a melee boomerang. The bladed boomerang does 1 blood, 1 stun, has rate of fire 2, ammo 2. It's a throwing weapon, which means that if he moves, he doesn't lose rate of fire. It has short range, so only 20 centimeters. It's sharp, so it rerolls wounds, and it's accurate, which means that dodge and defense rolls have a -1 to their roll, which is useful in taking on people like the Batman crew, which has a terrific amount of dodge in the crew. Now, his next weapon, the LE Boomerang, does 2 bloods, rate of fire 2, ammo 1. It's a firearm and has short range, so it has a better chance of wounding on a 2-up. However, you should probably stand still with this one if you're going to throw it, because you don't want to lose that rate of fire, especially because the ammo count is 1. So you can see that the Suicide Squad that I've chosen has a strong range potential with Ric Flag, Captain Boomerang, and Deadshot. And while before I was saying you really want to keep Ric Flag and Deadshot out of combat, not so much for Captain Boomerang. His melee boomerang does a blood and a stun, and it has the sharp special rule, which means it rerolls wounds. So he's not terrible in combat. He does decent damage output, and he has decent defense and attack. His endurance is not so crash hot, so you don't want to leave him there fighting Killer Croc or something, but he can hold his own for a little while. It seems to be the current theme for the Suicide Squad is that no one member should stand by themselves, and they all need to work together. So that's what your plan should be for Captain Boomerang and everyone else. So that pretty much covers it for this variation of the squad. As you can see, Ric Flag and Katana are immune to that Suicide Squad special rule, and that only leaves Deadshot, Captain Boomerang, and Harley Quinn. Now, if you were worried that you wanted to minimize it a little bit more, you could have Deadshot as the leader. I didn't choose Deadshot as the leader in this instance because Ric Flag, whilst he's good, he's not as good as Deadshot. He's a little bit more hardy and can take the damage without being hindered too much. But if you were worried about not being able to grab your objectives in time, then by all means, switch in Deadshot and you have only Captain Boomerang and Harley Quinn to worry about getting blown up. And you shouldn't really be worried because this list is pretty strong and you should be able to get to those victory points by the time the turn counter counts down. So the only variation that I'd add, if we wanted to go a pure Suicide Squad starter box set, would be Killer Croc. Now, he's going to work well with the special tactics that we're going to choose with the schemes. It's more of a vanguard deployment. We really want to get up very quickly up the board, and Killer Croc really will work well. The rest of the tactics are pretty much the same for everyone else. It's just that with Killer Croc in the sewers as part of his special rule, he's really going to help score those victory points. So we're going to have a look at his character card now. Killer Croc has a lot of special traits which are going to be handy for this list build. He has the Amphibious special rule, which means that he does not suffer any movement penalties for moving through difficult ground, water. I've personally never played on a board with water, but who knows what's going to pop up in a tournament, so that is always a useful trait to have. He has the trait Claws, which means that his unarmed attacks produce a bloodless stun, which means that he is going to be more useful in close combat than pretty much anyone else on the force, apart from maybe Katana, but he's definitely tougher. He has the Ferocious special rule, which means that he may close combat push without spending any special counters. He has the Tough Skin special rule, which means that if a character rolls damage against him, it's a -1, which means that he's going to be a lot tougher to get wounds through, which is very helpful, as I intend to use this guy as my close combat enforcer. So what my plan is that I'm going to have him use his Raised in the Sewers trait turn 1, which means that he has to avoid fire for 1 turn, which is fine, because that's what you want, really. You don't want him getting shot early on and getting wounded. And then he's going to pop out. Now hopefully I've put my sewers in an advantageous place. Sometimes that's not the case, but that's fine. He's got to pop out somewhere. And he's going to get into close combat, taking down the soft henchmen from early on as possible and generating those victory points for me. Now with his stats, he's got decent strength, movement is pretty good, attack is good, defense is okay, and his endurance is really good for his cost. And he is going to be the close combat guy that's behind enemy lines doing the damage for me while my guys are racing up from the deployment zone and doing the long range damage. Now if he gets taken out when people gang up on him, that's no big deal really, because I've still got another 4 guys coming to steal victory points, and it's sort of worth the distraction almost in terms of the reputation points cost. So that's who I would have if I was going to take out Ric Flag and run a crew using purely the Suicide Squad models. Now I'm sure there's someone out there who's way smarter than me that's worked out a better list, but that's pretty much what I came up with off the top of my head given the time frame I had. I'd love for someone to try and use this list and let me know how it goes. I'm sure it has its strengths and weaknesses, but most lists do, and I think I've tried to cover my bases as well as I can. It all really depends on the day and what the dice gods decide will be, you know. So that will be my 2 list suggestions for the Suicide Squad. Now for the schemes, I chose one for 1 scheme point from the general rulebook, which allows a character to move 10 centimeters out of the deployment zone, I think, off the top of my head. And the other one was from the Suicide Squad specific ones. And it's 2 scheme points, and it allows 2 characters to move 15 centimeters outside the deployment zone. So as you can see, my plan is to try and get up the board early on, seize the victory points, ensure that no one gets blown up, and then take down the weak henchmen using Killer Croc in the sewers or using the ranged firepower of Ric Flag, Captain Boomerang, and Deadshot to ensure that we get solid victory points each turn. So that pretty much wraps up this video. I hope you enjoyed my take on the Suicide Squad. If you have any suggestions, or if I've missed out any tactics or special rules, please let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like, and if you're new to the channel, subscribe and be prepared for more content in the future. This is Andrew signing off from BMG Productions. Thanks for watching.